The college hallway burst with whispers and murmurs as students moved in every direction. Among the crowd, two handsome boys stood near the lockers, engrossed in conversation. So, what do you think about the game tonight? We might crush them this time. Hmm, let's see. If Jung shows up late again, we might as well hand them the win. His tone carried a mix of annoyance and confidence. As they talked, a soft, hesitant voice interrupted. Excuse me. Both boys turned to look at her. Standing there was a petite girl, her glasses slipping down her nose, clutching her books tightly. Her face turned slightly red as her gaze settled on her. Can you tell me where the biology 202 class is? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Changmin glanced at Theo, whose eyes were already scanning her from head to toe. His friend seemed captivated, his usual composed expression faltering for a brief moment. Wine's neat appearance and innocent demeanor made it clear she was new here. Uh, Biology 202. It's down the hallway, to your right, then the second door on the left. He explained kindly, flashing her a reassuring smile. Thank you, she said softly, bowing politely before hurrying away. Changmin's smile grew as he turned to Taehyung, who was still staring in the direction Wine had left. Well, well, someone's smitten. Love at first sight, huh? Taehyung's face hardened, his jaw tightening. He scoffed coldly. Love and me, never, not in this life. Changmin chuckled, shaking his head. Then what? A new cheek for your collection? A slice mid curved Taehyung's lips. Maybe he slammed his locker shut and grabbed his books. Striding toward their classroom, the thought of her being in the same class stirred a new kind of amusement in him. Let's see how long this little nerd can avoid me. Young entered the classroom with his usual air of nonchalance, throwing his books on the desk. As he sat down, moments later, the professor walked in, adjusting his glasses and scanning the room. Good morning, class. Before we begin, I have been informed we have a new student joining us today. Who is it? The class fell silent, eyes starting around. Slowly, a small hand rose from the back. There you are. Please stand up and introduce yourself to everyone. Wine hesitantly stood, clutching her books tightly to her chest, her cheeks flushed as all eyes turned toward her. Hello, my name is Wine. I recently transferred here to continue my studies. I hope we can all get along. Her voice was soft, yet her sincerity struck a chord with most of the students. Changmin leaned back in his chair, grinning at her adorable awkwardness. Cute and smart, what a rare combo. But his thoughts were abruptly interrupted as Theung's sharp voice hissed in his ear. Stray away from her, Changmin. I don't share my toys. Changmin raised an eyebrow, amused by Theung's sudden possessiveness, but decided not to push his luck. Later that day, Wine sat alone in the library, surrounded by a stack of books. She was deeply engrossed in her notes when a shadow loomed over her. Startled, she looked up to find Theung standing there, his smile sending a chill down her spine. So, this is where nerds hide, huh? Wine clutched her pen tightly, her heart racing. What do you want? She stuttered, her voice barely audible. Taehyung casually placed a pile of papers on the table in front of her. These are my assignments, finish them by tomorrow. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Why would I do your assignments? It's your work to do. She stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. Taehyung's smirk deepened as he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Because if you don't, you will regret it. Trust me, little nerd, you don't want to see my bad side. Wine swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she stared at the intimidating boy in front of her. She wanted to say no, to stand up for herself, but her fear got the better of her. Okay, I will do it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tim straightened, satisfied with her submission. Good, don't disappoint me. He turned to leave but stopped at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. This is going to be fun. White sat folded in her seat, staring at the assignments. Her mind raced with questions, but one thought kept repeating itself. What have I gotten myself into? At home, Wine sat in her small study corner at home, her desk covered with papers and books. She had spent hours completing things assignments. Her own work pushed to the side. A deep sigh escaped her lips as she scribbled the last answer. Finally, she thought, rubbing her tired eyes just as she was about to start her own assignments, her phone buzzed with a notification. Curious, she picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number. You are doing my assignments or not you? Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the screen, gripping the phone tightly. It has to be him, she thought, feeling a mix of fear and irritation, but instead of replying, she placed the phone back on her desk and continued working. Moments later, another message popped up. Oh, now you're ignoring me. Do you think you can avoid me forever? Wine's chest tightened as she read the words. How does he even have my number? She wondered, her anxiety growing. The phone buzzed again. Wondering how I got your number? I have my ways. She hesitated for a moment. Before the next message arrived, let me make it simple for you. My father is the principal of this college. Do you really think there is anything I can get my hands on? Wine's jaw dropped. Of course, that's how he got it. He's not just a bully, he's untouchable because of his father. She thought, frustration bubbling inside her, but even knowing this, she refused to respond. Instead, she turned her phone off, trying to block out the intimidation. She picked up her pen and returned to her own assignments, though her hands trembled slightly. Hours later, when she finally finished her work, she hesitantly turned her phone back on. Another message awaited her. Good girl, don't forget to bring the assignments tomorrow. Let's see if you are brave enough to hand them over. Wine closed her eyes, taking deep breaths to calm herself. How am I going to face him tomorrow? She thought, her courage faltering under his relentless taunts. She sat there for a moment, trying to steady herself. I won't let him see me break, she thought, resolving to face whatever awaited her. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the fear of what they might do next. The next day, Wine walked into the college building, clutching her books tightly to her chest. Her eyes darted nervously around the hallways, checking every corner to see if he was nearby. Hopefully, he's not here yet, she thought. letting out a sigh of relief when the course seemed clear. She hurried to her locker, quickly spinning the combination dial and opening it. As she reached for her books, she suddenly felt a presence behind her. Her heart raced and a chill ran down her spine. Slowly, she turned around only to see Tim standing behind. His piercing gaze locked on her. Why do you always scare me? Can't you come like a normal person? She stammered. Taking a step back, Tim smirked, leaning casually against the lockers. Oh, leave it. Did you complete my assignments? She nodded quickly, pulling the neatly arranged papers from her bag and handing them to him without a word. He took them, flipping through to check her work, then turned as if to leave. But suddenly he paused and spun back around, his arms caging her against the lockers. Wine froze, her back pressed against the cold metal, her eyes wide with fear. I just remembered something, he said, his voice slow and teasing. You were ignoring my texts last night, huh? Before she could respond, he leaned closer, digging his head to the side of her neck. His nose brushed against her skin as he inhaled deeply. You smell sweet, he murmured, his tone sending shivers down her spine. Wine's breath hissed, her entire body going rigid. I was busy. She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Jung pulled back slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The corner of his lips curled into a smirk as he watched her trembling figure. Busy, huh? I will let it slide this time, but don't make it a habit, little nerd. He sat coldly, his voice dripping with dominance. As he stepped back and walked away, she let out a shaky breath, her legs feeling like jelly. She quickly gathered her belongings, trying to calm her racing heart. Unbeknownst to her, someone was watching them from a distance. A figure leaned casually against the wall, a slight smile playing on their lips as they observed the scene. This is getting interesting, they thought, their eyes glinting with mischief. It had been a week since Wine had last seen Theo. As the classroom door creaked open, Jim steps in, his usual cold demeanor taking over the room. His eyes scanned the seating arrangement, and his gaze locked onto Wine. Sitting at the very last bench, to his surprise, the chair next to her was empty. Without a second thought, he walked over and sat down beside her. Wine looked up startled, her heart skipped a beat at his sudden presence. Why are you sitting here? She stuttered, her voice shaky. He smirked, his eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. What? Am I not allowed to sit here? Across the room, Changmin's jaw dropped. Watching in disbelief, his eyes darted between Tiong and mine, clearly shocked at the sight of them sitting so close. Tiong, what's going on? He muttered to himself, his mind racing. The girls in the class were also whispering, exchanging glances, surprised by the scene unfolding before them. Wine felt everyone's eyes on her, making her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. After the lecture ended, the class burst into chatter. The room emptied out for the break, but Wine stayed in her seat, gathering her things. Tim remained behind, his piercing gaze on her as the others left. I want to eat sandwich and get me something to drink too. He demanded nonchalantly. Leaning back in his chair, Wine blinked in disbelief. Why would I do that? You can go by yourself. She said, her voice low, but she couldn't help but feel nervous at his presence. Tim's smirk grew more sinister. Without warning, he grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her toward him, pulling her. into his lap. You have to obey me if you want to stay here. Got it? He hissed, his tone cold and threatening. My dad is the principal here. If you don't listen, I will have you suspended. Wine's eyes widened in shock. Her heart raced in her chest as she stared at him, trapped in his embrace. Okay, I'm sorry, I will go, she said quickly, panic evident in her voice. She scrambled to her feet, running out of the classroom to get his order. Her mind was still spinning, her breath shallow with fear and confusion. As Vine rushed back with Taehyung's food and drink, she suddenly felt someone's hand grab her arm. She gasped, startled, and was pulled into an empty classroom. Before she could react, she was face to face with a stranger. It was John, someone she had not seen before. She had only been at the college for a week, so she didn't recognize him immediately. Hey, beautiful, he said, his voice dripping with a sinister tone. You're looking so sweet today. Let go of me, she stammered, panic setting in. But John wasn't listening. He pressed her against the wall, his hand sliding down her side. Who are you? Please let me go. She cried out, trying to pull away, but John wasn't backing down. He leaned in and, forcefully, his lips pushing against hers. Wine felt her whole body go stiff in fear. She managed to gather the strength to kick him hard in the stomach. John stumbled back, giving her enough space to break free. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ran toward the classroom, her eyes filled with tears. The door slammed behind her. Sobbing uncontrollably, the room felt suffocating, her whole body shaking as she tried to catch her breath. Tim was scrolling through his phone in the corner of the room when the sound of hurried footsteps catch his attention. He didn't look up but spoke in a calm, detached voice. Why did you take so much time? His words trailed off when he finally glanced up. His eyes widened as he saw Wine standing before him. Tears streaming down her face, she was trembling. Her expression haunted. He stood up without a word. She rushed into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Why are you crying? He asked, his voice rough filled with concern. Wine didn't say anything, she just held on to him tightly, her sobs muffled against his shirt. The silence made things just tighten with confusion and frustration. Talk to me, Wine, what happened? Wine took a shaky breath and pulled back slightly. Her eyes were filled with fear. Someone touched me? His face went stone cold. He didn't need to ask who did it. He already knew. Where? One hesitated for a moment, then pointed to her bruised lips. Her voice quivered as she spoke. Here. The realization hit Sting like a punch to the gut. There was no one in the college who could have done this except John. He always seemed to be in his way, always trying to make trouble. The young's anger flared, but he didn't let it out immediately. Instead, he pulled Wine into a tight hug, rubbing her back gently, his fingers soothing the tension from her body. It's okay now, Wine. No one's going to hurt you again. He murmured softly, but inside he was boiling with rage. He couldn't understand why John was doing this. But one thing was for sure, he wouldn't let him get away with it. Byung pulled away from the embrace and handed her his sandwich. Eat, you need it, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. White nodded meekly, sniffing as she took the sandwich. Byung left the room quickly, his mind set on one thing, finding John. He stormed into the canteen, his eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted John. Laughing with some friends, the sight of him made Taehyung's blood boil even hotter. She was crying, begging me to leave her alone. He sat with a sneer, not noticing Taehyung's approach. Before John could react, Taehyung grabbed him by the ear, pulling him backward so violently that John yelped in pain. The room fell silent as everyone began to whisper, watching in shock. How dare you touch our spine? He snarls. With that, he threw punch after punch, his fists landing with force against John's face and chest. You think you can just hurt her and get away with it? Not on my watch. Each punch was more punishing than the last, and Tim's rage only seemed to grow with every hit. He didn't stop until John was barely conscious, laying on the floor, groaning in pain. Next time you lay a finger on her, you will wish you were never born. He spat, his voice icy cold. Without another word, Tim turned and stormed out of the canteen. He headed straight back to the classroom where he knew Wine would still be. When he entered the room, he saw Wine sitting at her desk, her cheeks tear-streaked. She was chewing the sandwich in small, nervous bites, her eyes not meeting his. Tim stood still for a moment, his heart aching. At the sight of her, he approached slowly and sat down beside her. Wine noticed him then, her gaze flickering up to meet his. She saw the bruised cheek, a small but noticeable. Did you get into a fight? She asked, her voice soft, her concern clear. Yeah, he replied with a cold edge. I went to see the guy who touched what's mine. Wine's heart skipped a beat at the possessive tone in his voice, but she couldn't help but feel a strange comfort in it. She reached into her bag and took out a bandage, gently applying it to his cheek. Her fingers were soft as they grazed his skin, and Young felt something he had not in a long time here. You shouldn't get into fights, she said, her voice trembling as she looked up at him. It was necessary, he replied, his eyes hardening. Now no one will try to touch you or bully you again. And what about you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. About me? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. It's not guaranteed.